Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor, and today with me, Ross McEwen, a member of the Royal Stuart Society and Clan McEwen. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Connor. Thank you for having me, and greetings from Edinburgh in Scotland. We did have the sunshine today. Usually, we have to Google search it to know what it looks like, but it's a beautiful night actually here in Edinburgh. So no, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking me, and hello to everyone watching or listening.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition, and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle, or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
Hopefully, this will give my few Scottish viewers and listeners, something to really jump on and to be excited about. I have a few viewers and listeners in that area, and it's nice to talk to somebody not from America. So
there's nothing wrong with Americans, or most of them anyway, but yes. So I'm from Inverness in the Highlands, so I might not have a Scottish accent that hopefully is not, hopefully I'm not too difficult to understand, but if I run away from it, Connor, please keep me right. But yes, there's not that many Scots in the world, to be honest. So yeah, if you've already caught a few of them, that's pretty good going.
Well, no, I think your accent's quite understandable. I don't think we'll have much of a problem with that. And you've spent time in America, so that helps.
I love America. Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back when that is possible again. But no, I like America a lot for a million reasons, but also it's got so many culture. You can travel, a couple of hours in a plane, and everything changes and everything's different. So no, big fan of America, and hoping to get back there when the world makes a bit more sense.
I don't know if that will ever come true, especially making sense, but maybe once COVID ends. I don't know if it will make sense by then, but
I don't know which one will come first. Yeah, but I'd settle for no COVID and no sense. But we'll see. Makes it more interesting, I suppose.
Yeah. Well, today we're going to be talking about the Royal Stuart Society and sort of Scottish and British, his history and culture, and and who knows where that will take us. But I just wanted to ask you sort of what is sort of the basis for why British nobility holds onto their traditions or lose their traditions and lose their sort of belief in themselves as nobility, or belief that they have an important role to play in the sort of the whole society?
That's a really great question to start with. I mean, the term British nobility is an interesting term in itself. So if we're discussing nobility, where I presume we're talking about the lords and ladies, dukes and marquises, and landed gentry and things like that, I think this is a topic I've dwelled on a few times, actually. I said usually accompanied by a cold glass of something. I think it kind of relates to a topic that I know you've discussed on this show, and similar shows have talked about it, is that tradition, the idea of tradition, is kind of a bit homeless at the moment, especially in the West, especially in Western culture, I feel. Mm-hmm. The comment section will agree or disagree, I'm sure. But I think that tradition being a bit homeless in modern culture, what do I mean by that? I think in general, life seems to be moving away from tradition, whether that be, or traditional values at least, and the idea of maintaining or advocating for traditional values, whether that be family or religion or even etiquette, actually, sadly, is increasingly becoming treated with a bit of disdain, I think, and at least by the loudest, social media or media classes. And I suspect we're one of noble birth or carry a title of any great weight. It may actually hinder them rather than help in their efforts, depending on what profession they choose. And the example that comes to my head first with that example, with that line of thinking, is now the late 7th Marquis of Bute, who had a career as a racing driver and didn't use his title at all. He, instead of his full name was John Crichton Stuart of Bute. He just called himself John Bute or Johnny Bute, and he had a racing career, I think, in the late 1980s. But I know lots of peers, and I'm very fortunate to know several peers and members of the nobility, and many of them don't use their titles at all consciously. So 200 years ago, using your title and using your status was probably the path to a career or status or influence. I think today, again, depending on which industry you're in, it may actually get in the way a little bit. And so, as I said, I know a lot of people quite well who, myself and people like me, are the only people who ever refer to them as that, and they just don't feel that comfortable with using it for work purposes. So your question about whether they lose the dedication to their traditions or the nobility, I think it's been a natural evolution. Again, maybe one of the casualties of modern life and veering away from the traditional values and what makes it a culture or a society that puts importance on those things. I mean, Harry and Meghan are a weird example to use of anything, in my view. However, they're another example of people who are, well, maybe they're not a good example of much, but they're looking to get away from the formality of it all. Whereas there are many, many people who actually respect that. It gives them comfort, it gives them security, it gives them a sense of pride in their country or their society. And I think, unfortunately, it's the more I see it, people who are born or inherit titles or nobility or lands and estates. I mean, the Marquis of Bute actually, I think the current Marquis of Bute, I think, was born in 1989 or thereabouts. So he's quite a young chap with a huge title. It was created in the time of George III. Massive estates. Mount Stuart on the Isle of Bute is one of the most beautiful buildings I've ever seen. So I think people like that, and the Duke of Westminster is another young chap, seeing how they will steward their lives and steward their interaction. I mean, he's quite a private chap anyway. I think will be really interesting. And actually, in the Royal Stuart Society, which we're going to talk about in a moment, it's really interesting to see that interaction between some people. I mean, there's a peer of the realm, a lord, a baron, who I know who is very down to earth, one of my favorite people to talk to. And he sometimes realizes that some people only want to speak to him because of he's the baron of or lord somebody, and there's not that much interest in he as a person or his family. But shows like Downton Abbey and things like that, and The Crown, give us that romanticized, sentimental, extraordinary image of what being a member of this nobility is like. And actually, another segue, in Scotland, the legality of barons and lords is a real interesting topic to follow, because on one side you have gentlemen and some ladies, but mostly gentlemen, usually from your part of the world actually, who will track down or become aware of a title that is for sale, or a piece of land that is for sale, a large piece of land that has deeds and titles with it, and they will buy that for sometimes up $150,000. These things aren't cheap. Sometimes they're buying that from an earl or a duke, because in Scotland we have the most nobility per capita, and I think always have. So even 400 years ago, we had more earls, barons, dukes than other countries based on our population. So you've got that on one side, and I know a few examples of chaps who have men from America who have bought lands and titles, have them formally recognized, because in Scotland we still have a heraldic court of law, get them formally recognized, and then they turn the estates into, they actually breathe new life into them. They put so much money towards refurbishing the castles, the land, have events, this charity work. But you also, in the same token, on the other side of that conversation, you have become a lord for $20 today, buy now while stocks last.
I saw that actually. Yeah. I've seen ads for these weird
and they
things.
Look great. They're amazing pieces of PR, and I reckon they're making lots of money. But it's selling a lie, in my view, as someone who places value on these traditions. And essentially, I mean, it's two things. One, it's a great piece of PR. It sounds great. It looks great. The idea that someone could just pay 20 or 50 bucks to become Lord McHugh is really appealing. Legally, it doesn't work, and in many countries around the world, and you've spoken about this on previous shows. In Europe, the most monarchies were decimated between from the Napoleonic Wars to the end of World War One. So this kind of stuff doesn't exist in this country, in the UK and in Scotland. We still have chivalric courts. We still have heraldic courts. We still have judges that sit on these courts. So it's still a legal thing. It's still living and breathing, thankfully. And our court of law in Scotland that grants coats of arms, for instance, is granting a new coat of arm almost one a week at the moment. So it's a real living and breathing thing. So going back to your first question, your actual question, because we went off track there. What makes British nobility continue to lose the sort of dedication to their way?
Or keep, because I am interested in people who do keep their traditions and their nobility alive, not just the ones who you could say sell out, I guess, or leave it behind.
Or it becomes too difficult and expensive. You have lots of estates that have fallen into ruin because the modern world didn't. In fact, Downton Abbey is a really good example of that. That show touches on some of the difficulties that large estates, in a glamorized way, faced. You had massive staff costs, the estates, everything became more expensive. So maybe they like the Duke of Leeds, for instance, which is an extinct title now. There was lots of financial difficulty there. They were all in search of rich heiresses to keep the thing going, and I think some of that. I mean, the clan community, which again we could talk about later, is a great way of keeping a lot of that, because most, I'm going to say most, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but most clan chiefs and commanders will hold a hereditary title of some sort, so Lord of or Marquis of. And maybe that helps them embody that status and make sure it continues for future generations, because there is a dynasty type mindset there. But it is a shame to see. I think you find some clan chiefs and some members of the nobility working in filmmaking and working in up in technology and up and coming things. So maybe the two worlds can live together, or it's just an evolution. These things change, but when you do come across estates that open up for weddings and things like that, and the families still live in an apartment, I think that's maybe just the way of things, and at least it's keeping it going and it's not turning into flats or a hotel or something like that. But I think it depends on the person. There are so many. I mean, baronets, which isn't a title you hear of often, but that is
below
sort of,
baron, right?
Yeah, so you'd become Sir Connor, but there's over 1,500 of them still in the UK. That's a lot. So we have a lot of titles, and the Duke of Montrose, for instance, they can't even name all their titles because there's so many of them. So over time, they kind of collected into a smaller number of people. So if you're going to sell them, why not sell one of the ones you don't use? But I think over the next 10, 20 years, I think it'll be interesting to see how many of these great households still exist and how the lords and ladies and everyone in between conduct their business. But in Scotland, thankfully, we do place some importance on that. It's still, there's castles everywhere. You're tripping over castles here. So, and a lot of them have these very long and established histories. So I really hope some of that will urge people these people to hold on to those traditions and those pasts as much as they can.
I'm very jealous of the fact that you have castles that are, that you can walk by and that you can see whenever.
Oh yeah, well, about 100 meters from where I am just now, I'm in the Holyrood area of Edinburgh. There's Restalrig Castle, which was one of the seats of Clan Logan, and it's a pilgrimage point for Logans, and of course Logan's a very common surname around the world. So yeah, I mean, and it's literally just in a park. You if you don't know it, you'll miss it. No, truly, you're walking through the park, and there's the end gable of a castle built in the 1300s, and you're just so. And actually, I think some of my fellow countrymen and women to say they don't appreciate it might be a bit strong, but we certainly don't. I don't think we carry an understanding or I don't know what the right word would be. I don't think we realize how lucky we are to have so much history still everywhere. And actually, it's people from your part of the world and Australia and places like that with British heritage who come to visit. Sometimes that infectious energy actually rubs off on us, because when their ancestors left, I mean, your surname's an Irish name, so when your ancestors left, or when most of America, when the Irish and the Scottish were forced to leave. I mean, some people may have chosen to go, but that's a whole other conversation.
Forced, encouraged. What's the difference?
Well, one of the first contentious remark of the evening probably is, the Highland clearances were still going on 30 years after slavery was abolished in the British Empire. There's lots of this kind of deep down bits of history that are difficult to find, very difficult to communicate, and difficult to appreciate. But some of that, the story kept going here. So I think we may have lost some of our appreciation for this living history that's everywhere. Edinburgh Castle's just about, no, actually the Palace of Holyrood, sorry, it's half a mile behind me, and that was where Bonnie Prince Charlie set up camp during his campaign. It's just there. So it's wild. It is, and I like to think a historically conscious Scotsman. So, but I know most of us, you really have to go searching for people who appreciate and know, because it is everywhere. So it's like, where do you start? But yeah, very long answer to a short question, but I think it's probably the pressures of modern life. I think it's Western culture veering away a little bit from traditional values, or feeling they should, or being ashamed to hold them. And I know your previous discussions on this channel regarding Catholic faith, for instance, I mean, unfortunately, Scotland and Britain has quite a poor history with regards to the treatment of Catholics for a period of time. I mean, that's an understatement, but it's that kind of having confidence in your culture, which is a huge topic, of course. But I hope that sense of etiquette and history and values that was partly embodied through that class of people can live on. But we'll see. We'll talk again in 10 years and see how it's gone.
Yeah, well, interesting. You mentioned the Lord McHugh thing, that you could buy a title. I actually have learned that I have a Scottish ancestor who was a lord of a castle. I think he was given it by Charles the First.
Oh wow, okay.
And then the head of the family shot a rival, and then that guy, he shot him in the leg. He then died, and then he was to be arrested. He fled. He tried to flee to France. He somehow got back, and then he got executed. And then the rest of the family just went to America.
Well, I mean, that sounds like I would believe that would be a Scottish story. Yeah, I mean, that's minus the execution. Most of that still happens. But well, that's fascinating. Well, if you ever work out where and who, please send me the details, because I'm sure it's probably not far away from here. But yeah,
I think it might have been in northern England, actually. Though he was Scottish, but he was given a castle, I think, in northern England. I have the information. I don't know where I put it. It's on some email somewhere.
Well, that was commonplace, and a good way to secure the support of Scottish barons and noblemen was to give them lands in England, because England's so much bigger geographically than most of Scotland. So yeah, I can believe that, Connor. Well, your castle awaits, so you just have to reclaim it.
It's in ruins, I believe.
It's just a start. It's fine. But yeah, so I hope that's a good enough answer. But yeah, I think we'll see how it goes. I hope it evolves into the modern times, but it gives us plenty to talk about.
It's true. Tradition is kind of in of itself a small bit to hold on to that not many people hold on to, except for it's kind of like this mindset that if it's from, say, like an African country, they should totally hold on to their traditions, and their traditions are good and interesting, blah, blah, blah. But then if you look at anybody, any Western traditions, any Christian traditions, then it's, terrible and, it should be removed. That's the attitude of many in the world today.
Well, our society's having a tough time with questions just like that, I think. I mean, the African comparison is interesting because obviously African tribes have a really interesting and rich history. And it looks like, again, from Edinburgh and Scotland, it's impossible to really know what's going on in places like America. But I think people should embrace their cultures and their traditions, and everything be respected. I think at the moment, the West certainly feels like it's having a bit of a crisis regards that. But we'll see. It gives us stuff to talk about. But as long as, I think, just be respectful and live and let live, which is the most cliche thing I could possibly say, probably. But I think there's some genuine truth to that, and hopefully it feels like the world's probably always in a crisis. I think we're just sort of experiencing our version of it. But I certainly hope there's a happy continuum to be had for everyone. But no, we should be proud in each of us and what we're doing and what we're trying to achieving. And as long as we're not hurting anyone whilst doing it, then all the power to us, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned etiquette. I don't think Americans have etiquette, to be honest.
Oh, that's harsh. That's harsh.
At least specific etiquette. Nobody, I mean, there's you learn how to, respect elders, or to introduce yourself to someone older than you. But and maybe you call your friend's parents Mr. and Mrs. and all that. But even that somewhat is has left, and there's a lot of people that just go by their first names, even towards younger people, and so etiquette is kind of at least a hard thing to figure out in America, because there's no set anything.
Well, I mean, I think even the way we hold our cutlery here in the UK is the American version. I mean, I'm not going to tell you how I came by that, but yeah, I mean, it's just different traditions. And when I'm in America, I certainly try, and I can never blend in, but I try and coexist with what I think's going on. But I think as long as you're seen to try and not just fly in the face of it, which some people do and some people can't help. Like in Britain, we're notoriously woeful at learning other languages. And I think some of my countrymen and women, if you're abroad and you're having difficulty, just shout louder. Is what people do, and of course that's just not going to work. But yeah, I mean that's the challenge of life, really, is coexisting and learning something along the way.
I think Americans would prefer actually, standing out. I think any Scotsman or Englishman or coming to America, we tend to like when they stand out. We tend to like when they're different. We tend to view that as like more intellectual or more more interesting than ourselves. So
well, maybe
but that's why we like Downton Abbey.
Maybe, well, I love Downton Abbey as well. But yeah, in terms of Scottish men and women, it's the, if Facebook's anything to go by, and who knows if it is, the Americans do the kilt much more frequently than we do. I mean, I think for some Americans, a kilt is a daily piece of attire, which I envy heavily. So no, all the power to them. But I mean, America is a strange country in the sense that America is a blend of everywhere else, and I guess in some ways certainly most European countries are that as well. Mm-hmm. But with technology and things, Americans are able to research their past a bit more, and it's one thing I always find interesting when you're speaking to Americans, especially when they'll identify as Italian or Scottish or Irish, and for us, we don't, for us they're North American, and so I think that can start a really interesting conversation about roots and heritage and what you identify as. And the Scottish clan culture and the clan world, it's actually countries like North America, like the United States and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, who are they're doing parts of Scottish culture way better than we are. So I think we could drink the same kind of coffee as you guys are to try and be more confident, more excited about our own history and our own heritage. But that's a work in progress, I suppose.
Speaking of the clans, what is the structure of the Scottish clans? How does it relate to the Scottish nobility, and sort of where did they overlap, or do they not overlap at all?
That's a really interesting question. Scottish clans nowadays are a really interesting phenomenon because when you think of clans, you think of shows like Outlander, which I personally rate very highly. I'm a big fan of that show. You think of William Wallace and swords and shields and sieges, which would be maybe more fun on some days. But Scottish clans still exist. In Scotland, a clan is literally translates to the word family. So a clan very much is a family, but only it wasn't always in the genealogical sense. So I'm a McEwen. There's actually I have 3 lines of different McEwens in my history. So Scotland's a small place, and a lot of people identify with that genealogical connection. If you are MacLeod, then that's your history. It doesn't altogether always quite work that way. And McEwen, you have an MC in front of your name. So Mick or Mac translates to son of. So it's like the Irish, O'Brien, son O'Brien, or of Brian. McEwen was son of Ewan, and the Gaelic translation is Vich-Ewan, so son of Ewan, and it ended up being this family structure where there was a chief or a leadership, and they organized themselves, for agricultural reasons, for security, for food and textiles, and they had lots of little communities geographically located, and that's the next part of that conversation is that Carruthers, which is a borders name, a surname from the Scottish borders, some families that lived on Carruthers land took the Carruthers name. So it's not always genealogical. Nowadays, I suppose it is, but a structure of a clan traditionally, as most people would know, is chief at the top, and the chief of a clan in Scotland would be a genealogical thing. In Ireland, sometimes it was different in the history. It would elect a chief. In Scotland, once that first election happens, it tends to be to go down through the family. A chief would traditionally have several officers called the chief's household for them, and that still exists today in many clans. The role of Sheniki, which is a Gaelic word, so it reads not like how it sounds. It would be the herald and the poet and the storyteller and the recorder of history for the clan. So the High Sheniki in Scotland is the closest role to that is the Lord Lion King of Arms, which is an office in Scotland that is an important part of the clan structure in Scotland now. It's existed. It was first recorded in 1377. And prior to that, there was records of the Sheniki, the High Sheniki, having the story. When a king was being crowned, it would have been a he then, would confirm the king's lineage and who had the right claim, and how strong someone's claim on a crown or a throne was. The office of Lord Lion still exists today, and that position nowadays is vital actually for the legal confirmation of a chief. So what some of your viewers may not realize is that there's between 120 and 150 clan chiefs and commanders alive today. There's way more clans than that. A lot of clans are kaput, really, or extinct. Their lines totally faded out, or they became a sept of another surname. It's a hugely complicated topic, but it's still between 120 and 150. Now, I would say most of them, but by no means all, also have a title, either a baronetcy, so it would be Sir someone of someone. Our own clan commander in McEwen is Sir John McEwen of Marchmont and Bardrocket. That's a baronetcy that his grandfather was awarded in 1953. Campbell, the chief of Clan Campbell, is the Duke of Argyll, who's the senior duke in Scotland. And as I said in the first answer, and he's got lots of titles that come after that. So there is some connection between clan culture as it exists today and the Scottish nobility as it was then, and it still does exist. The chief of Clan Gordon is the Earl of Huntly. So you do often find one goes with the other. But equally, there's Madam Pauline Hunter, the chief of Clan Hunter, is not a dame of or a countess of Madam Pauline, who also is one of the hardest working clan chiefs in Scotland. Actually, if you are a hunter and you're watching this, look up your clan. You should be very proud of the chief you have. so there's a lot of connection. The clan structure as it exists today is quite interesting because it's all about societies. The word society is, it's probably one of the most said words in my vocabulary nowadays, because there's a society for everything. But in clan life, what started to happen at the end of the 1800s and the start of the 1900s is that various parts around the world, North America being probably the main proponent of this, became even more interested, nay, fascinated in their heritage and history. And so clan societies started popping up everywhere. And today there are countless clan societies. Some are busier than others, some are more organized than others. But what you find in most clans, and using Campbell as an example, there's a North American clan, Campbell Society. There'll be an Australian Campbell Society. There'll be a German clan Campbell Society. And they all kind of work in some ways on their own, but they all answer to the same chief at the top. With McEwen, we have one society for the whole world, which is an administrative Goliath sometimes, but we have we're very fortunate to have some great people with us. So we manage everything from one group in all these different countries. And so the clan setup now has a society chairman, a treasurer, someone who can count, someone like me who's the governance and boring legal guy, who likes to put it all together. But for things like heraldry, for things like succession, for things like clan lands, so clan hunters still own their castle that was granted to them in the time of Robert the Bruce, I think. Clan Irvin, so their current chief Alexander Irvin of Drum, their Drum Castle has been in the family for 700 years. Now, similarly, actually, in a wee bit to our first answer, was that you need to modernize, you need to evolve. So the clan structure now still has the chief, it still has armigers, which are people who have their own coat of arms, and they're deemed part of the leadership of their particular clan. But it has just countless, usually very enthusiastic, clan members and families around the world who have various levels of knowledge and passion for their clan and family. And for instance, our Clan McEwen clan gathering in 2019, before the COVID monster, to quote a French-Canadian friend of ours, I think there was easily 2/3 North American, and this was in rural Scotland. I mean, it was challenging even for me to get there. And the rest were a mix of Australian and New Zealand, and I think there was maybe only a dozen Scots out of well over 100 people. So that was really eye-opening to me, that actually clan life and clan culture is actually living a healthier life around the world. I think
Interesting.
It is interesting, and it's and there must be a PhD study in there somewhere. But the clan structure now is societies all over the world who attend games. In North America, you have Grandfather Mountain, which is way bigger than any Highland Games or Scottish Games here.
Can you describe Scottish Games more?
Sure. Yeah, of course. Yeah. So Scottish Games, usually called Highland Games, but they do happen everywhere. So I'm from the Highlands of Scotland. So for me, there is a geographical line where the Highlands end, called Drummochtar Pass. So when you say Highland Games, we all know what everyone means, but in Scotland is a small country, but it is chopped into little bits. And there are some lowland clans that would probably be offended if you called them Highland clans, because in Scotland, if anyone is watching this is either from here or has visited here, if you drive for 45 minutes, the accents change, the history changes, so it's a very diverse country in terms of that. But Highland Games, as we're going to call them for the purposes of this, are huge events nowadays with food stalls and like merchants. You can buy. It's like a festival, really. But it's centered around traditional Highland Games sports. So the bagpipe competitions, there's Highland dancing, which is a very impressive thing to watch and do. Tossing the caber, which is when you see men and women, and sometimes the women are better than the men, tossing literal trees, logs, gigantic logs of wood, literally just a tree with the branches cut off it. That's called tossing the caber. Lots of sports. So usually our Highland Games is centered around a running track or something like that, and the inside of the running track are all these competitions going on at the same time. Years ago, I was the lead drummer for the Inverness pipe band, And so the World Pipe Band Championships were in Glasgow in 2004, and that was colossal. That was enormous. And that you've got, lots of people who come for the weekend. There's ceilidhs, there's dancing, there's drinking, there's singing. Nowadays I attended a clan Highland Games in Oban in Argyll. I think that was the last one before COVID arrived. And that was just a day, and everyone's dressed up in their finery, in their Highland dress. There's kilts everywhere, and it's a great opportunity for tourists to come and learn. In fact, actually, at that Oban Games, we had a gentleman walk up with a McEwen kilt, who had no idea that Clan McEwen Society even exists, and it was just we're in the middle of nowhere, the most bizarre conversation ever. And he left. He signed up. He bought some stuff. Thrilled. We had a drink of McEwen blend coffee together, and off he went. So Highland Games are, and in the States, especially in the Carolinas, north and south, you just have enormous Highland Games, and there's parades and lots of food, lots of fine Scottish whiskey, I'm sure, some sports, some tug of war. That's always a good testosterone creator. And it's just a jolly event. But for clans, you normally find every clan or most clans will have a stall, and so you'd go there to learn about the history, to talk with them, maybe enjoy a cup of coffee or something to eat. And so it's also an opportunity for people to learn that their clan still exists, or that it does exist at all, and to ask questions about what's under your kilt, the boring ones, as well as some of the more interesting ones, about sporrans and the different parts of our culture, our clothing and Gaelic language. And it's kind of like a culture festival, but they are terrific fun. And I highly recommend, whether you have Scottish heritage or not, to try and visit one. So again, another long answer to a short question, but the structure of a clan nowadays that has that traditional element where a legally recognized chief, and as I said, legally they would be recognized by the Lord Lion, which is a Scottish judge. It's a government department, actually, which hopefully demonstrates the importance that Scotland actually still places on all of this. You still have the chief, you still have armigers and officers, but underneath, you could. There's many clans that are legally charities, which I think that's a very clever way to go. So there's a traditional element, but we have we've had Zoom meetings constantly. Clans in the modern age, I think, are a fascinating phenomenon, and I'm sure other countries that have similar, examples of tribes or groups hopefully are adapting as well. Otherwise, they die out, and that history dies out, and the enthusiasm dies out. So I think Scottish clans are a really interesting cultural topic of study nowadays. Something that we don't talk about enough in Scotland, in my view. I'm not sure if we ever could talk about it enough, but it's something that I wish some of us, I certainly have, and I'm pretty enthusiastic about this stuff anyway. The North Americans and the Canadians and the Australians and New Zealanders, the ones I always cite because they're, in Australia, they built, I don't know whether it was fiberglass or what it was made of, a replica of the facade of Edinburgh Castle in a football stadium for a festival. And it was seeing it from Facebook was just mind blowing. Because I've never been to the Edinburgh Tattoo. I've never been to many of those festivals. So I think we could learn a thing or two from those around the world who are passionate and proud of their heritage. I think we're passionate. I don't think all of us are as proud as we should and could be. But clans are there. So anyone who's watching this who thinks they may have a clan, or they may, or they have a Scottish or Irish heritage. Irish clans don't get talked about enough. Do explore it, because there's a good chance that your clan still exists in the modern time, and you can get involved and play a part in your family's next chapter. So,
yeah, does the clan feel like a family as it means?
Yeah, I think so. That's a great question as well. Does it feel like a family? I think it does. For me, it does. And when I went to this clan gathering in 2019. I'd never seen so much McEwen Tartan in my life, and it's quite a rare tartan. It's very difficult to get. It's very expensive as well.
What is it again?
So McEwen Tartan. So every clan has one at least, but usually more than that in tartans. There's like Stuart's a very common tartan.
What's a tartan?
Sorry. In America, you call it plaid. In America, you would call it a plaid. So it's a
Plaid?
pattern, plaid, Plaid.
Oh,
So
plaid?
plaid. Sorry. Okay. Sorry. In America, you call it plaid.
No, that's okay.
Sorry. So it's that kind of pattern of it's the one time I don't have any near me. It's that kind of pattern of stripes and boxes of different colors that represent different families. And tartan, there is a legal register of tartans in Scotland. So you know the exact color count and how to create and get the right colors. And so apologies, Connor. So yeah,
No, it's fine.
McEwen tartan would be McEwen plaid, the pattern of kilts.
Ah,
And some
okay.
people wear, yeah. So there are some kilts that have no color, but the plaid would be is the word for it in Scotland would be tartan, Tartan. So I'd never seen so much McEwen coloring in my life. It looked like a tartan shop just threw up over everyone. It was fantastic. And of course, everyone's, hello, Mr. McEwen. Oh, hello, Mr. McEwen. Hello, Mr. You didn't even have to bother with first names. It was just bizarre. But yeah, it's feeling more like a family. And also, as I said, by that enthusiasm, we're finding people from abroad are getting in touch with us. They're visiting these places in Scotland that some of us have never even been to. They're exploring their heritage, and they're giving a boost in excitement. And it is feeling more and more like a family. We're coming up with, our shared aims. We're working together. We did some, as I said, a lot of clans are charities. And so they have that charity spirit, whatever their cause is. I mean, for McEwen, our clan crest is an oak tree stump. So we actually have, we're involved in a lot of tree replanting and planting work in that part of Scotland that we're from, and a lot of environmental stuff like litter picking and stuff that just aligns a little bit with our history, but in a modern context. And that can be a very, familiar. There's a lot of kinship in a lot of clans. Some clans get on better than others and happier than others, but certainly in McEwen, from my vantage point, it is a family, because some of us know a little bit more than others, and therefore it's just a big learning experience and learning opportunity. So again, I can't stress this enough. If you think you may have Scottish heritage, explore it, because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, so I wanted to move on to the Royal Stuart Society.
Sure.
So, how did you get involved in the Royal Stuart Society?
It's a really funny story. Well, it's a very interesting story, I think, because the Royal Stuart Society is an organization that has existed since around 1926, and it's the foremost Jacobite organization in the UK. Now, the Stuarts were the Scottish royal family from Robert I's grandson onwards. So late 1300s, early 1400s. I'm going to be ashamed if I get that wrong. And our royal family, the Stuarts, ended up being the kings of England, kings and queens of England, when the Tudor dynasty died out. So the Royal Stuart Society is it's sneaking up towards its centenary, which is quite a scary thought. But it's a group that looks to promote the monarchist values, traditional values, Stuart values, and promote rightful monarchy and legitimate monarchy, and education. And it's an all round. How I became involved in it was quite by accident. I was at a party in London on the banks of the River Thames, and I saw a gentleman with a Stuart plaid tartan tie. And I'd obviously had enough ciders or enough glasses of something to go up and say hello. And because in London, if you hear a Scottish accent as a Scotsman in London, especially, I mean, London's a little bit like New York. In fact, I think London's less friendly than New York, which might be difficult to believe, but I certainly found it. If you speak to anybody, they instantly clutch their belongings because they think you're just about to rob them. But in London, as a Scotsman, if you hear a Scottish accent or anything, you're drawn to say hello and learn their whole life history. But I was at this party on the banks of the River Thames, just opposite Parliament, actually, and I saw a gentleman, a very well-dressed gentleman with a Stuart tartan plaid tie, and I went up and said hello, and he had a thistle badge, and he was from Cuba, so that made no sense at all. But he was telling me, yeah, exactly. But I said, what's this all about? He says, oh, it's the Royal Stuart Society. I was like, what's that? Because I knew who the Stuarts are, because we learned them a lot growing up in Scotland in school. As I said, I'm from the Highlands, so we learn a lot about Jacobites, because the conclusion of the Jacobite story occurred just outside my hometown at Culloden. And the gentleman told me about this Royal Stuart Society that is a group of men and women who run commemorations, lectures, events, learning. They publish papers all to do with Stuart history, Jacobite history. And I said, that sounds like my cup of tea. So I just applied as a member, which anyone can do, royalstuartsociety.com, and gave my reasons for wanting to be a member of the Royal Stuart Society. Got in and attended some events. The first event I attended was on the Navy of Charles II, which ended up being an utterly fascinating lecture. And then we all went for dinner afterwards. So after an event, there's a big dinner afterwards. And I sat down. I ended up being opposite an earl and clan chief, completely by accident, a peer of the realm. And I had no idea until after the end of the meal. So we actually had a lovely conversation. This actually goes back to my earlier point about sometimes titles can get in the way. I just talked to them as if they were just, gentlemen with an interest in this stuff. And then it was actually afterwards I found out who they were. And it was just such fun. It was very academic. It was very geeky, to do with royal history, which is one of my favorite subjects. And it was after a couple of events, I just got asked whether I offered whether I could help. There was every January, there's a commemoration of the execution of Charles I in London. The Royal Stuart Society run next to a statue right in Trafalgar Square, which is right in the middle of London. There's a commemoration there. There's a wreath laying, and then later that day, the society goes to Windsor Castle, to St George's Chapel, where Charles I is buried. And then there's an evensong there. It's just a spectacular event to be at. And I just asked whether I could help. And I think I kind of just worked my way in, really. And it's ended up being something that I spend most of my evenings on, especially at the moment, happily. And what to me it was exposure, because in London, like New York, there's a society for everything. If you have an interest, there will be a group of people out there somewhere who are involved in it. And thankfully, Stuart history is a big enough topic that it attracts a lot of really interesting people and a lot of very knowledgeable people. I mean, it was terrifying, some of the first events, when every sentence out of everyone's mouths I wanted to write down, because it was just overwhelming with the amount of knowledge these people have. And some of them were bankers, some of them, every profession you could imagine. And it's one of my favorite things I've ever done was become involved with the Royal Stuart Society. And then about a year later, after helping out with a lot of stuff, in fact, maybe even more than that, I was invited onto the council. The Royal Stuart Society is governed by a council of 15, I think. It's chaired by the Lord Aylmer, Julian Aylmer, who's Baron of Belgrath, which is an Irish title, actually. And the Governor General at the moment, and since for 32 years, I think, is the 14th Duke of St Albans. The Duke of St Albans is a descendant of Charles II and Nell Gwyn. So it's very, and there's various members of the oh gosh, I'm forgetting. Oh, sorry, right, I'm going to ditch that. I'll come back to that guy. But there's lots of members of the former royal families of Europe, and lots of academics, and just a really thoroughly brilliant group of people. And the society membership, there's about 400 plus members all over the world, are equally enthused and equally, we're running our first online lecture actually in October, as we held a Zoom meeting earlier this year, and most of the attendees were from abroad. So it's a society that's existed for nearly 100 years. It's got a really interesting history, which we can come on to later. But how I became involved is kind of how I've done most things in my life, is just
accidental.
Accident. Well, no, I do sometimes. I often have an aim. If there's something I really want to be involved in, and I think I can contribute something, which is the most important thing, because some people want to be in the room just for the sake of being in the room. But I really feel like I could contribute something, and I feel I have. I hope I have. I just persisted, and thankfully, it's just been one of my favorite things I've done so far. And I'm just getting started. There are some people who have been on the council for over 50 years. and I'm 32, so they've been on it a lot longer than I've been alive. But yeah, it's one thing I hope I keep. In fact, this is the Royal Stuart Society tie. In fact, I'm wearing this evening. So it's just something I thoroughly enjoy doing. It's academic enough for me. It's geeky enough for me. It's fun enough for me, and it's got that strong foot in history, because as I said, the Stuart royal family went from being the Scottish royal family to the British royal family. I suspect ruling over the three kingdoms of England, Ireland, and Scotland. So it's British history and Stuart history are interlinked. So that's how I got involved. Just pestered and persisted. And if some of my Royal Stuart colleagues are watching this, they'll hopefully be nodding with in an affirmative way.
Yeah. Is there council positions, or is it just councilmen?
That's a great question. There's the Governor General, which is His Grace the Duke of St Albans, the Chairman, which is the Lord Chairman Lord Aylmer. There's there's a Treasurer. There's the Principal Secretary, Hugh McPherson, who is the gentleman I do the most work with. Hugh is a great friend, one of my favorite people alive, and I work with him a lot on logistics for council events. And the newsletter actually that went out a week before we were filming this evening. And there is a publications officer which deals with our journal. The Royal Stuart Society usually publishes a journal every few years of academic papers and new stuff discovered. And then there's so how many is that? 4 or 5. So there's about 10 council positions, of which we all have sort of equal say, the rest of us. And before COVID, we actually used to have very grand meetings with a very long table, and it was fantastic. So hopefully we can get back to that. So at the moment, we're all just boxes on a screen. But that's the world now, isn't it? That's what we are right now. We're boxes on a screen, just heads. But yes, so the council is about 15 people, and that's made up of lots of different people from lots of different backgrounds, which contribute. And it's not just. In fact, it's mostly just, I don't know if commoner is the right word, but back to our first conversation, it's ordinary people who have something to contribute, and that's usually the best ingredients for a good for success, really.
I mean, there is something to be said about nobility. That sort of, I mean, nobility has to be created at some point, and at some point it comes from, at least hopefully, from people who have something to give, and then
Yes.
they and that usually will turn into a peerage or something like that. I think nobility can be quite stale when it becomes not about growth, or not about giving something to become a peer, but or just money, or or something like that. Something more concrete, like if you, back in the day, if you participated in a great battle, or you might gain honors and some sort of nobility, kind of like how knights were created.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting topic, because in the UK, so the political makeup of the UK is quite complicated, but in Westminster, which is the UK government, we have the House of Lords and the House of Commons. You can have Lords in the Commons, but you can't have commoners in the Lords. The House of Lords in 1999, or prior to 1999, was full of hereditary peers. Now, what that means is people who have a title that was granted however many years ago by whichever monarch throughout history. I mean, the Earl of Oxford, that title was first created in the 1100s. So some of the stuff was a very long way. And it was found that, in the opinion of some, that these hereditary peers were not there for merit or by merit. They were there because of this long established way of things. And in 1999, the Labour government abolished, I think, all but, it was less than 100 peers, hereditary peers. And since then, and there's been no additional hereditary peers added. So if one passes away or leaves, then I think they're replaced by their heir. But it shouldn't be more than however many, 90-ish hereditary peers. Now, the House of Lords has over 800 members. So the rest of them, 700 and something, are all people who have been placed there by the government of the day. Now, that can include lots of different people who have done different things, which maybe you and I may differ on the opinion of whether that merits a position in a legislative chamber. And the way legislative process works in the UK Parliament is that laws can be suggested by either house, but normally it's suggested in the House of Commons, which is the parliament that the Prime Minister is a member of. It then goes up to the Lords for comments and amendments. If it has some, it can get sent back, but its normal trajectory would be through the Lords, taking into account any amendments or suggestions, and then it goes to royal assent, and the Queen signs it off, and that's it, it's law. So there are some people in the House of Lords, and you get £300, I don't know, it's $400-ish a day for turning up, without having to do anything if you don't want to, per day, that are there because they had, well, there's a Scottish one that had a lingerie company who is now in the House of Lords. There's an awful lot of, actually, I'm not going to name him, but there's an assistant to a former politician that is in there because the politician that he worked for had a spare nomination when he was leaving. And it was literally a case of, do you want it? I guess so. So while there are lots of scientists and lots of medical people, lots of people that actually have genuine knowledge and experience, and I would certainly hope the vast majority fall into those categories. There is a bit of feeling, and it's a debate that happens in this country more often recently, that the government of the day, because also you have to remember the House of Lords is also a political organization, so there are Labour peers, there are Conservative peers, there are Liberal peers, there are some peers that have no party affiliation. So if you're a Conservative government and there's more Labour peers, so Labour in the UK is the meant to be the opposite of the Conservatives.
It's complicated, isn't it?
It is complicated. If you're a Tory, if you're a Conservative government with a majority of Labour members in the House of Lords, then your laws are never going to get through. So what each government does in recent years is that if you're a Conservative government, you pack it with Conservative peers, and then what happens is that the House just grows and grows and grows and grows, and you end up with, I think the only legislative chamber that's larger than the UK House of Lords is the Chinese legislative body, which is, there's over 800, there's 650 MPs, members of parliament. So that's your Congress, I suppose, is the closest thing. And then the Senate, which is the upper house, is the House of Lords. But these people are not elected. They have no democratic basis for being there. And most of them, the vast majority of them, in fact, have been put there by government. So that's a real interesting democratic conversation in the UK.
Sure. This is just my personal opinion. I would say the House of Lords should be filled by the monarch.
Well, that's interesting. So the monarch,
instead of the Prime Minister.
Well, the House of Lords, the Prime Minister doesn't sit in the House of Lords, and when the monarch comes or the sovereign comes to open Parliament each year, she sits in the House of Lords. She does have a throne in the House of Lords.
I just mean that she should she should be in charge of who sits on the House of Lords. I don't know if that's
that goes back to a conversation whether we're a crowned republic or not, because what powers the Queen or monarch has or not is a constant topic of debate actually in this country. And my thesis at university was actually looking at that a little bit. But yes, absolute monarchy and the UK are very far away from each other right now, and getting ever more so. I would suppose.
What did you come up with when you wrote your thesis?
Wow, yeah. It was all about freedom of information, which is actually something that the UK was really. It took us almost 100 years to adopt it, and we were way behind the US with that. But communications with Her Majesty and Prince of Wales, who's obviously been the longest heir presumptive in history, their role, it's almost you just need to decide what the role is, because I think what damages the monarchy and what is damaging the monarchy, amongst a long list of unfortunate things, unfortunately, is where do they stand? Are they in or are they out? And I think we've come up, we're living in this quasi existence just now, and some of the previous guests that you've had on this show will be able to explain it very well, is that we don't really know what the Queen's role is. It's a constitutional monarchy, but Britain doesn't have a constitution. We've never had a constitution. Certainly not one that's written down, and that's not by accident. The only, in fact, one of the few constitutions we've written was Germany's after the war. So we're a constitutional monarchy without a defined constitution. So when scandals occur, and there was one in Scotland a couple of weeks ago where it's been found that the Queen had access to legislation before it was presented. Now, that as a sentence is not offensive or not, but when you match it against, well, the Queen is, we're told, to be apolitical and not have a view on anything, then that does become a problem, and that's what sometimes often damages the monarchist cause, is that the monarchy in the UK is painted as this apolitical, really out of the way, don't complain, don't explain group of people. And then when they do get involved, like Prince Charles got involved in environmental matters quite often, actually, and there was a big scandal called the Black Spider Memos regarding letters that Prince Charles had written to the government. That damages the monarchy. So it's almost this ambiguity of is the Queen allowed an opinion? If she is, then great, we'll work that way. But at the moment, we're being told she doesn't and isn't, which is crazy. And then when she does express something, then all hell breaks loose. So I think the constitutional monarchy situation that we've seemed to have adopted, especially in the 20th century, is almost working with other factors to the royal family's demise in this country, and it's really sad to see.
Well, hopefully clarity will prevail in the future.
Well, Charles would be an interesting. I mean, he's going to have a different, because when Queen Elizabeth came onto the throne, the world was a very different place, and generations before ours, who I think were just better people, they valued duty a lot more. They valued the right thing. They cared a lot more about their fellow man, I think, in my view. The world now that Queen Elizabeth is experiencing now is not that. So when Charles does become, well, is he going to become King Charles, or maybe he'll take another name? That's another interesting Jacobite topic.
Maybe to avoid what's the word? Every Charles seems to be controversial.
Well, yes, and
At
not
least
all of
in
them tend to
England.
live very long. Yeah, there's that too. But also, is he Charles III? Because his grandmother was a supporter of the Stuarts, his mother's mother. So Charles III. Well, Jacobites would call Charles Edward Stuart, Bonnie Prince Charlie, Charles III. So that's another conversation.
Oh yeah, that is a good point.
Yeah. So is he going to be Charles III, Charles, or is he just going to take a different name? I would reckon, if I was advising him, and I'm not, a different name. But what kind of royal family is he going to have? We already know that he's going to slim it down massively, because the royal family is large in the UK, and there's a lot of names and faces that most of your viewers might not even be aware of. So I think the reign of the current Prince of Wales, when he is crowned, I think will be very different. And I think it'll need to be more defined, because if we're told the Queen has no role in politics and then is found to have had a role in politics, then those that are of a Republican mindset, it's a gift wrapped situation for them, and it's a really easy argument for them to make, and a very difficult one to defend, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So I think it's we'll see.
Is it true that Prince William and Prince Harry are descendants of Charles II?
Yes, they are. Yes. So okay, that's a great topic. Yeah, through their mother. I think they're actually descended twice from Charles II, but that shows you how complicated their things are. Yeah, so their mother is a descendant from Charles II, as is the Duchess of Cornwall, actually. So the current Prince of Wales's wife. Oh no, maybe it was Charles I. Sorry, but yes. So when William has the most Jacobite blood in him than any monarch since George I. That's not true.
Wait. Would it be George the First?
No. I'm playing a prank, honest. But he's descended from Charles, so he's further on down in the Jacobite succession, which is a huge topic. But yes, he and his brother Harry, through their mother Diana Spencer, they have Charles II they are descendant of. So yeah, so that will be another interesting. That'll give us lots more to write about in the Jacobite sphere when he
But-
gets onto the throne.
That's wouldn't it be considered illegitimate bloodline?
Well, that's another interesting conversation. So the Jacobite succession goes through the female line, and that's one of the topics that when you talk about Jacobite succession versus the Hanoverian succession, when
But I thought Charles II didn't have any legitimate children.
no, he didn't. So, but his closest
So
James's closest cousin was would be the next person in the Jacobite succession.
I just thought, my understanding was that one of Charles II's illegitimate children, it goes down to
William and Harry.
William's, William and Mary, or
Yeah.
William and Harry, yeah.
Yeah. So sorry. Yes, it's through that. Yeah. So as you said, Charles II had lots of kids, just none of them legitimate.
Yes.
And there's a few of those titles that still exist. You know, Duke of St Albans is one of them. Duke of Richmond,
Oh, Duke of
who's also the Duke of Lennox.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds
The
good.
Duke of St Albans, the Governor General of the Royal Stuart Society, is descendant from Charles II through his Charles II and Nell Gwynn, who was an actress. That's who he's descendant of. So he's a direct male descendant of Charles II, just not legitimate.
Yeah.
Excuse me, because but there's a few dukes still alive that have that same story, which is great. Maybe they should all get together. That would be a good Royal Stuart Society event.
Be hilarious. So what are the connections between the Royal Stuart Society and the predecessors, such as the Order of the White Rose?
So actually this will come on to talk about the succession a little bit as well. So I said the Royal Stuart Society was founded in 1926-ish, and it was founded after World War One by the survivors of a number of neo-Jacobite societies which had existed before World War One. Now, if you ask why did they break up for the sake of the war, it relates to the war itself, actually. And as I said, the Jacobite claim that the Jacobite claim is that the House of Stuart descendant to the kings of Bavaria, or the Bavarian royal family. And Bavaria, of course, was on the other side during World War One, and these societies, which were based in the UK at the time, with Jacobite loyalties, pressing Bavaria's case would be a real quick way to get a treason conviction. So they all kind of disbanded in a hurry. So the Order of the White Rose, which is the one you mentioned just a moment ago, that was one of those pre-war Jacobite groups, one of the first, in fact, and it was founded in around 1886 by a gentleman called Burnham Ashburnham, who was an earl in his own right, actually, and he was actually the English agent for the Spanish Carlist claimant at the time, the Duke of Madrid. And
that's confusing.
Yes, well, yeah, and that goes back to the start of the 19th century when you had France and Portugal and Spain having all these dynastic civil wars, actually, in some cases, between traditional legitimist monarchies and more modern monarchies. But the Order of the White Rose was founded by that gentleman who was a Catholic convert himself, actually, and he favored traditional monarchy rather than the sort of crowned republic, which I guess is kind of what we've inherited now in the UK, if you're of that opinion, that some countries like Spain also might have as well. And the Order of the White Rose was designed to seek Jacobite sympathizers, and it was very successful at doing that, actually, and attracted Scottish and Irish nationalists, as well as Catholics and sort of high Anglicans as well. And their sort of wish and dream and hope was to restore the House of Stuart. And it was largely a sort of romantic and sentimental organization, but very popular amongst monarchists, as you'd expect. And it was one of a few Jacobite organizations that was formed in the 1890s and the start of the 1900s with that similar aim of restoring the House of Stuart and celebrating Jacobite history, Jacobite culture. And it was early into the First World War, the Bavarian heir, Prince Rupert, was pictured in he appeared in German uniform in support of the Kaiser at the time, Kaiser Wilhelm II, which was was a very difficult thing to explain away. And so the Jacobite succession had at that time Prince Rupert as the heir to the legitimate throne of England, Ireland, and Scotland. And so once he appeared in uniform and provided his support to what was the last German emperor, the Order of the White Rose and the Jacobite League of Great Britain and a couple of other ones, they quickly closed. And again, for that, you can't, if you're in the UK and the UK is at war with Germany, if you're part of a group that's kind of swearing allegiance to a German royal family, that probably wouldn't be a good thing. So the World War One
kind of a weird. That's kind of a weird switcheroo, just because, if you think about the Hanoverian, how do you even say that?
Hanoverian, yes.
Hanoverian, the Hanoverian family in the 1700s, would have been considered kind of the same thing, but reversed.
Yes, and for those people watching who are thinking, what the hell is going on here? When the Stuart line, this all goes back to that age-old battle of Protestant versus Catholic, and the UK Parliament wanted a Protestant monarchy, and therefore enter George I, and that's how. Whereas the Stuart cause, Bonnie Prince Charlie and his father and his brother, Cardinal Duke of York, they were the Catholic options, and the UK Parliament didn't want to go in that direction. So the Jacobite succession, which I don't think I did a good enough job of explaining a moment ago, is often a wildly misunderstood thing. Very difficult to explain, as we're discovering right now. But the claim goes through the female line in the Jacobite succession.
Yeah.
It goes from the Stuart to the House of Savoy to the House of Austria, Este, and Modena, and then the House of Wisselbach, which is the Bavarians. And that's the king. And at that time, Britain was still the three kingdoms: Scotland, England, and Ireland. And the claims can go through the female line in the UK line of succession. So the nearest cousin to the final Stuart monarch was the King of Sardinia, the House of Savoy, and neither he or his brothers had any sons. And so that eventually the Kingdom of Sardinia goes to cousins. And however, one of them had a daughter, and so the Stuart claim went with her, and then she married the Duke of Modena, and blah, 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 and that all goes all the way down to the Wisselbach prince, which is the Bavarian family, which is where the head of the House of Stuart, in the opinion of Jacobites, remains to this day. So that's Franz, the Duke of Bavaria. Obviously, Germany, like many European countries, lost its royal families after the war, but it's the Duke of Bavaria, Franz, Duke of Bavaria, who Jacobites have as the head of the House of Stuart. However, disclaimer, the Duke makes no claim of his own, and that's a really important thing to say, and that's actually what causes an awful lot of upset with an awful lot of people. The Duke of Bavaria is not about to grab his sword and shield and get to work taking Britain. He is very happy with the way things are. He makes no claim of his own, and he is rightly quite upset with folk who do make claims on his behalf. So please, anyone watching this, please go and research, but it's a huge bone of contention for many people. The Duke of Bavaria, who in Jacobites' opinion is the head of the House of Stuart, does not make any claim of his own. But the Royal Stuart Society formed, as I said, after the war in the 1920s, and that was a sort of a restart of Jacobite causes and centres of discussion and study and celebration, and has been ever since, actually. And so the Royal Stuart Society, in some ways, and it was formed by a chap called Captain Henry Stuart Wheatley Crowe, and it's very much was formed out of the ashes of those earlier orders and societies and leagues and groups, of which the Order of the White Rose was one of them. So it's kind of regarded as the successor by some. I'm sure some might disagree with that, but the successor to those earlier Jacobite groups, or at least the continuation of that Jacobite movement that existed in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But to the Order of the White Rose's credit, and that gentleman managed to secure the patronage of Queen Victoria for a huge Stuart exhibition that took place in the late 1800s. So the Royal Stuart Society exists now as kind of the successor to those groups and orders and societies, because it's, we're free to talk about this stuff again. But those orders were disbanded at the outbreak of World War I, because of that connection with the Bavarian family. And it just obviously was, like I said, a quick way to get a treason charge was to be sworn. But as you said, there's some interesting parallels with the Hanoverians as well. And of course, World War I actually caused the British royal family to change its name to Windsor for fear of that. So, difficult for us to think about, 100 years later. But
It's
yes,
a topsy-turvy world. That's all I'm going to say.
Always. It has to be. I know, and apologies if I didn't explain that very well, but it is.
No, you
It's
did a great job.
very difficult to explain, and there is a lot of familiar players. But the Royal Stuart Society, for that long, for nearly 100 years, has incorporates all that stuff, and in amongst our archive, we have items that belonged to these societies, and we don't. If there are other Jacobite groups, that's fine. And there are many of varying size and success. We just sort of sit as one of the main. I mean, we are the only society that does we do a Mary Queen of Scots commemoration at her in Westminster Abbey every February on the day she was executed, murdered by her tomb. So we do a lot of these. We're the only group doing a lot of these commemorations and a lot of these events. We hold a restoration dinner every May, although it'll be November this year, at the Caledonian Club in London to celebrate the restoration of the Stuart monarchy when Charles II came back. So we're one of the main groups that do these events, and we've had people travel. We've had people travel from the United States for these events, which blows my mind. But we've got people coming from Finland. We've got members literally all over the world. It's crazy, but that shows you the importance of this topic and how linked it is with so many other parts of history. Because America, one of the interesting topics in America is, were you guys to have a monarchy, who would it have been? And the story of religion, and I said it, religion in the UK is very complicated. In Scotland, it's even more complicated. I had the pleasure of meeting the Lord Primus of the Scottish Episcopal Church last year, and my fiance is Roman Catholic, and she just asked him, it's just at the head of the Scottish Episcopal Church, so how did it get so complicated? And it was just an amazing moment where the Lord Primus, one of the senior members of Christianity in Scotland, literally had no idea where to start, because it's such a huge topic. With Presbyterianism is obviously the main Christian denomination in Scotland. Episcopalians, the Catholic Church, which thankfully for the last 150 odd years has now been able to practice again, which is a great thing. There's lots of different routes to how this all happened, but the Royal Stuart Society tries and brings a lot of them together, and part of that is trying to embody, or at least carry on, the work of these previous orders and societies and groups, because there were many of them, and they had some very prominent people as part of them as well, which is often forgot. I think Jacobitism is sneered at and laughed at by a lot of people today, which is infuriating, because it's largely due to just misunderstanding the point. And sometimes you don't have the opportunity to, go into a soliloquy about the whole history and how we got here, which is frustrating. But that's true with probably every part of life.
Yeah. Interesting enough. Soon the claim would move to another house, to the Liechtensteins.
Liechtenstein. Yep. Yeah. Great. Yes. So that's because Franz is the Duke of Bavaria is an older gentleman, and he has no heirs. He does have a brother, but they're about the same age. And then goes to the House of Liechtenstein, which is a young claimant, a young gentleman there. So I mean, that's an exciting next chapter in this story. I mean, you've got Plantagenet descendants in Australia. It's quite an interesting topic. But actually, there's a Catholic church in London. It was one of the few allowed at the time, because it was sort of doubled up as the German embassy back then, or the Bavarian embassy, and it has a memorial in it where it has a plaque that acknowledges the Bavarian Prince Rupert, in fact, as the head of the House of Stuart, Tudor, Plantagenet, etc. I mean, it's quite I'm not sure Buckingham Palace were pleased at the time, and that's another thing to mention, is that it's not the aim to antagonize those that who don't believe in the line of succession or anything. And that's one of the things that to come out of our discussion this evening, is that we don't denounce, we're not throwing stones at Buckingham Palace or shouting absurdities. The monarchy is what it is, and we respect it and we cherish it, and we feel very lucky to have it, actually. Acknowledging a line of succession that never was, or not in reality, is acknowledge. You can acknowledge one thing; they're not mutually exclusive. You can acknowledge one thing but still cherish and respect the other. And sometimes we do have issues where people take things maybe too literally, and maybe just get the wrong end of the stick, or just particularly passionate about other things. But we don't throw stones at Buckingham Palace and grit through our teeth a little bit. Everything should exist. Monarchy is better than none. So it's an important point to make because it often gets lost.
Yeah, there's an interesting comparison, just a little thing, and this is kind of a debate going on, and a conversation within the Catholic Church is, there's canon law, and then and the whole concept is like, what do we canon law is the place we live, or or not the place where we live, because not everything happens according to canon law, but it's still sort of the desire. But then a cardinal came out and basically said, canon law, one of the important parts of it is it can be promulgated or brought about, but to become really law is to actually be put into place and accepted by those it is written about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Catholic myself, but I think
Sure.
I spend more time watching, reading, and listening to Catholic discussion than it's far more interesting in my view. But yeah, I mean, the Roman Catholic Church just now is, especially, I mean, one of your previous videos actually dealt with it, about the situation with the Latin Mass, and Vatican II in general is just fascinating. And I, with the Royal Stuart Society, in fact, the only Latin Masses I've ever attended have been as part of the Royal Stuart Society, actually, which have been fascinating for me to watch and be a an innocent bystander. I had no idea what was going on half the time, but it was very impressive and it felt very special. But yeah, you're looking for that what you should aspire to, what you could aspire to, and you might not. In fact, I'd be amazed if people did live absolutely every bit of their life as they hope and wish and should and could. That's part of growing as a human, I suppose. And the Roman Catholic Church, certainly, as an outsider, but someone who has quite for more experience, has attended more Catholic events than I think most other Presbyterians I know. It's a fascinating story and belief system to learn about, and I respect it hugely, and I love talking about it. I love listening to it because there's so much involved with it. Obviously it goes right back to the very start. But yes, the canon law discussion, I mean, the differences between the two living Holy Fathers is just fascinating, and that's why that's why there's so many programs like yours that deal with it, and like some others that I know we both enjoy that talk about it. But discussing is part of being human. It's important. You can hope for change, but don't wish away what you have now. Work towards it. And yeah, I won't pretend to be an authority on any of that, but I'm watching with interest.
Other points of view are very important to to understand, especially from the outside looking in. It's it's completely different sort of way to understand it, and I don't feel like there's enough of that, because I don't think there's enough people that actually take an interest to look inside from the outside and not just say, oh, who cares about that, or that doesn't matter, whatsoever. So it's nice to have people to be looking in from the outside.
I love listening about it. I love learning about it because it does, and it's always changing, and there's so many different moving parts to it all. Like I said just before we started recording, the last sort of event I went to before lockdown one of how many, who knows, happened was a Charles Cologne lecture on Valentine's Day in London. And actually, funnily enough, after his lecture, there was a few members of a few members of the clergy in the audience, and they did a small Latin mass right there and then. I mean, it was in a lecture room. It was amazing. But after that event, we all went to a restaurant, and the questions I was asking, I seemed to be well received, because they weren't the kind of questions a Catholic would be asking necessarily, and that's the vibe I got. So actually, and I was just there to soak it all up, because there was nothing I had to offer, because obviously Presbyterianism, there is no head of the church other than Jesus. So we don't have those kind of discussions. But yeah, again, you said earlier about Western culture, and parts of our culture that have served us rather well for a long time seem to be in the dock all too often at the moment, which is a real shame. Because being able to talk about things is the only way you'll solve them, and that might account for some of our political woes at the moment, is that people don't feel either empowered or able to talk about stuff. And if you shout at someone and you call them names, they're going to believe less in you and more in themselves. So if you really want to change opinions and influence people, you need to listen, and you need to do so in a civil way. Otherwise, everyone's just going to yell at each other, and nothing will get achieved, which is where I think we kind of are right now.
Treat them with dignity.
Yeah.
Well, you brought up Charles. Have you read his book, Star Spangled Crown?
I've not. However, asterisk, Charles, if you are watching this and you have gotten this far, I am waiting without any patience left for the audiobook versions to arrive, because I go out on walks nearly every night around Edinburgh. I live very close to Holyrood Park, and I listen to his podcast. I listen to the interviews he's done with people like yourself, and of course he's on his book tour right now as we're recording this, 12th of August. But I'm such a fan of audiobooks. I spend all day, every day, writing reports and reading legislation and all this boring stuff. And so audiobooks in the car or out for walks and parks and stuff is what. So no, I've watched enough of his appearances to probably have a good grasp of what it's about. And I think it actually embodies some of what we discussed this evening about the United States, and were it to have a monarchy, what shape that would take, how would it collide or coexist with the culture. It's actually kind of a mirrored version of some of the discussions happening in Scotland regarding Scottish independence, which is also a massively misunderstood on both sides topic, especially around the world. It's maybe not something you want to go into, but it's looking at, so Star Spangled Crown looks at injecting a monarchy into a republic. Scottish independence is not in every way, but in some ways is almost the opposite of that, which of course has happened before in other countries around the world, and it doesn't always end well. But Charles, please do an audiobook version, and I bet you after this I'll find out he has, and I just haven't found it. But
I doubt it.
Okay, well, in that case, please, Charles, Christmas is coming up soon. Make it a gift for us. But that's me with all books. I much prefer the audiobook version, and thankfully they're getting more common. But what I think is interesting about that topic, and I think he refers to the Charles Edward Stuart in 1782-ish, when Bonnie Prince Charlie, as he's most commonly known, was approached about maybe being the monarch of the United States. And obviously he turned it down, or circumstances that we might never know about. But no, I think books like that's sort of half rooted in fantasy and half rooted in history and reality and just letting the mind wander are really good. So if he doesn't do an audiobook, I'll just have to suck it up and buy it. And no, I do own it. That's the worst part. I've got a copy.
Do?
Of course, yeah. I'm a collector of books. For sure, I buy books, and I'll go.
You buy books, but then you listen to them on audio.
I have a book that was released last year by an American politician but the book's about his work in law, and I bought the book, but I'm listening to the audiobook, and that sounds weirder to say than probably to listen. But yeah, I like collecting books, and we're about to move into our new home, and I'm going to have a big bookcase and everything. But audiobooks, I go out for walks every day for a few hours, and audiobooks always. So Charles, please do the audiobook. Help us out.
There are some books to me that I just like have to read myself. And then there are the books that I'm willing to sort of listen to. but yeah.
I like it. I mean, but that we're in the age of podcasts. Otherwise, we probably wouldn't be speaking right now. So people have such a short attention span, and I think I work with words every day. And at the end of the day, I'm wanting to just go outside and go for a walk. Because when the sun shines in Scotland, we all sort of stop what we're doing, and go outside. And so an audiobook version of Charles's book, and of course he's got a new book now, so he can get started in the audiobook version for that. So that's a long answer to a short question, but yeah.
Yeah, but one of the things, sort of, just it is, the person who becomes the U.S. king is the Jacobite successor.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I mean, that, like you said, that is going to come, because that can go through the female line. We should have a story to talk about that forever.
Yeah.
There's some like earldoms and titles that just stop. Like I said, the Duke of Leeds is a title that's gone, because the last one had a daughter. This succession, the Jacobite succession, is something we'll be able to talk about forever. So, Star Spangled Crown 2, The Empire Strikes Back, that'll be a good title. Then Charles will have lots of material. But I think it's really interesting. There's lots of parallels to our situation, because as we said earlier, our monarchy in the UK is in a really odd position, where during the reign of Elizabeth II, the world has changed so much. And so what kind of monarchy Charles, the Prince of Wales, will lead, and then William thereafter, because William's much younger, and then his son George. What world they're going to shape the royal family to be is going to be fascinating, I think.
There is something about the royal family when so if there's a daughter that's born first, does it still go to the eldest male, or does it or would the crown follow? Because it hasn't been in that situation, and won't be for a really, who knows when that might come up again, because it's going to go Charles, William, George, but there's no actual,
well, Queen Victoria, I think, had a daughter first, I think, and so her son, the man who became Edward the Sixth, or Edward the Seventh, gosh, I don't think he was the eldest. I think she did have an older daughter, but I'd have to check that. It's scary. It's scary when you're doing an interview and you talk about Edward the what, because your mind suddenly disappears entirely. You're like, wow, gosh, I know this stuff, and then you just put it on the spot. But I think but that's interesting. But yeah, I mean, William has George, so sure, that the male succession is at least good for another 3 generations. But yeah, I think
really with just there are a lot of movements. I could totally see them somebody trying to, Parliament maybe, trying to change that, so that if there was a time when a female was the oldest, they would try and make her the heir instead of her brothers.
Yeah, no, sorry, yes. So I mean, they're doing that with some titles just now, so that if there was just a daughter, then a title could live on. And I think that's the way the world's going. I think it makes a lot of sense. Because what you'd find is that the estate could go to the female, but the title had to jump to a cousin a million miles away. The Parliament, it's interesting, the money that's paid to the royal family is often up for discussion, because the royal, and it actually is quite interesting. They're just called the royal family. You don't even need to put the word British in there.
Yeah.
Royal family. There's a lot of political discussion about them anyway. Quite a lot of it is quite grotesque, which is a shame. But I think genuinely the British royal family and their constitutional status is quite difficult to defend sometimes, depending on who you're up against. So I hope there's some more clarity. I suspect with Prince of Wales and William, and William seems to have a very capable, dedicated, respectful, and just inspirational wife in the Duchess of Cambridge. So I think he's done well, and so here's hoping. But George attended, Prince George of Cambridge attended the football final, soccer final here a few weeks ago, and so he's, he's less than 10 and he's in a suit and tie attending events, so he's off to a flying start.
That's adorable.
It was, yeah. He had all the mannerisms of like a young banker. It was quite bizarre to watch, but yeah, I think William and Kate seem to have, certainly from the outside, appear to be very grounded people. And William's up here in Scotland. He's been up here a lot recently. In fact, the Queen's in Scotland right now. So yeah, I mean, the subject of the union is a whole other topic, and as I said, a wildly misunderstood one, because the side that wants Scottish independence is not a wholly Republican one, and that's one thing that I must say the traditional Catholics that I've spoken to from abroad don't, either what they've read or what they think or what they have been told, don't seem to think that. But it's not. Scottish independence and republicanism are not the same thing, and I just now don't respond to it now on Facebook or things like that, because there's very little happiness that can be garnered from things like Facebook. But the topic of Scottish independence and the breakup of the Union, the United Kingdom, is not a binning of the monarchy at all. In fact, it probably would help our relationship with them in parts of the country. So, but that's another topic.
It seems like it would have been better if the parliaments weren't united, but they're but still having the same allegiance.
Well, I mean, that's another. I mean, because Bonnie Prince Charlie, one of the first things he did when he arrived in Edinburgh was to reinstate the Scottish Parliament. Scottish Parliament was abolished adjourned in 1707, and then was re-adjourned in 1999. And actually, I don't agree. I think the Westminster, the battle with Scottish independence, for many, and you get people of every kind of belief system, is not an anti-English and it's not an anti-royal family. It's an anti-Westminster. It's a political conversation. It's not. It's not. For as I said, there's no such thing as a generalization, but for most, it's politically motivated. The Scottish Parliament here, there's the Act of Union in 1706 and 1707, the treaties of union. Sorry, you have to look at whether it still works for the UK, for England as well. Because if you are living in the north of England, London, I guess it's the same in the US. Maybe if you're the further away you are from the seat of power, the less anything reaches you. And that's the same in Scotland as well. I'm from the Highlands, and they don't. It's Glasgow and Edinburgh down the south that get most money spent in them and stuff, because you're so far away from that epicenter of power. But I think that the subject of independence and breaking of the union, every empire comes to an end, and I just think that this topic could be better explained for those outside. Because as I said, I don't pretend I know what's going on in. Well, France is a great example. France is always in crisis, it seems, if you look into it. And there's always protests about anything, because culturally they feel more able to protest and make their feelings known, which is a great thing, I think, as long as it's done safely and in a dignified way.
Not French Revolution style.
No, but that wasn't either. That, but maybe some of their culture today is rooted in that. I don't know, but I mean, the 70 years of the 19th century in France was a curious time in dynastically, but
so many republics.
Yes, and the odd emperor here and there, and again, that people in our you said, I think maybe even before we started recording, that learning the history of other places is so interesting. We learn a lot about Scottish history, even in the UK. I mean, the UK is such a complicated country, and again, it's a small island, 65 million people. Scotland's never hit 6 million in its existence, but culturally we are so divorced from one another, and it's getting worse as time goes on. If you're living in the north of England, Westminster is not working for you, or that's a loaded statement. If you're living in the north of England, you are more likely to believe, perhaps, that Westminster is not working for you. I guess it's the same if you live in Lima, Ohio, or something, and is Washington D.C. got my interest? The investment doesn't always find its way to these rural parts, and breakup of the union is a topic I really wish would be discussed more objectively. Would leave the emotions at the door, just talk about how we got here, because this is a 1,000-year-old argument, some parts of it, and where we're going. And I find it odd, and this will probably offend some people, and I'm sorry. Sometimes when you have people from your part of the world who were the first country to get away from the UK, to then turn around and tell people in this country, regardless of whether it's Scotland or Ireland or anything like that, to have an opinion like that, I find really odd. And that just, to me, it doesn't always show ill intent or malice or anything. It's just there's not been a space carved out for that conversation to be had. And that's a real shame, because we could be having some really interesting philosophical, religious, political, cultural conversations about that, and really learn something. I mean, when I worked in Parliament for a time, and actually I ended up really enjoying my drinks and meals with people who were as far away from me as possible in terms of briefing and political thought, because I knew I wasn't going to change their mind. They probably weren't going to change mine, but I would learn something, and they would hopefully learn something too. And so the next time I have a discussion like that, I've actually got a bit more about what they're about. So as I said earlier, if you just yell at people and call them names, and you're certainly not going to achieve what you want to achieve, and you're going to end up with a very divided, unhappy group of people, which, fortunately or unfortunately, whatever happens in America hits our TV screens immediately. And I think the story of the United States over the last however many years, you can ask Charles probably, it's about that, especially now, that you can't have two sides of, you can't have an opposing opinion and get away with it, really, it seems.
Yeah, and we're not helping in that area. So all the apologies for all the stuff we bring to you.
It means our comedians have a lot of content, but yeah, I mean, it is scary, and but that I bet you 300 years ago and more, there were people like you and I having this exact same conversation, and maybe we're just never meant to get to that level. I mean, or maybe one of the strifes of life is to try and get as close to that place as you can. But in Scotland, that there's marches all the time. I mean, our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, came up to Scotland last week and was greeted with saltire flags in support of the Yes movement. The Prime Minister said he's not going to come back. It's the UK is so much less united than I think people from parts of the world like yours believe. As I said, it would be great to have a campfire round table about that one day.
I think, our president, I believe, mentioned something to do with nuking gun owners. So,
and you've had more people vaccinated than you have people. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of curious things going on right now. And actually, yeah, your previous president his mother was Scottish, actually. So that's probably the closest we'll get to a Scotsman in power. But yeah, I mean, politics. I read a quote once, and I'll probably get it wrong, but to be a good politician, you have to be articulate, kind, conscious, well-educated. You have a good moral head on your shoulders, and anyone who had all those qualities wouldn't be stupid enough to go into politics. So
they wouldn't get anywhere.
No, they wouldn't want to. It'd be it's much worth mine. So probably the best people suited for political life are actively avoiding it, probably. But
yeah, I can't remember. There's some TV show or something that makes me I'm reminded of, but I can't. Oh, actually, weirdly enough, this is the most bizarre connection ever. But it's actually, this line is similar to something that was done in the most recent Fantastic Beast movie.
All right. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, I think Jude Law is playing Dumbledore, and he says that he likes, he basically says that he likes one of the characters because he doesn't want power. And some people say that or Dumbledore's character has a lot to do with avoiding power because he was afraid of using power. Anyway, so it's just kind of a weird connection.
Well, I mean, I've watched your video on Harry Potter, and when Lord of the Rings gets dissected, I'm just, my jaw's on the floor, because people can just read into stuff I can't. But I think I'm a big Trekkie, so the original sort of Star Trek stuff had a lot of these moral messages at its core. And the art of filmmaking has definitely deteriorated recently. But
yes,
I think so. You can find if you're looking for something, you'll find it, I suspect. But yeah, political life in the UK is just bizarre, because, as I said, you have the Westminster Parliament, you've got Scottish Parliament, a Welsh Assembly, and a Northern Irish Assembly. A lot of people don't realise that Wales and Northern Ireland has their own version of that. It's a very disunited kingdom at the moment. But
who knows? It's going to be medieval at some point again.
We've got all the swords in the museum, so we just can crack them out. But I mean, there's even rules about in fact, the English flag, the St. George's Cross, which is a white background with a red cross. That became highly politicized in the worst possible way a few years ago, where if you were flying a St. George's Cross, you were instantly thought to be racist and horrible and hated everyone. And members of Parliament even got into trouble by laughing at people who were flying their St. George's Cross. Whereas I can fly a saltire flag outside my home and not get called a racist, but they'll probably think that I'm a nasty separatist or whatever they want to call us this month. So I think
what is that? What is it called? What is it? Salt?
Oh, sorry. So the saltire. So Scotland has two flags. The saltire is the blue with a white St. Andrew's cross over it. That's our national flag. It's called the saltire, SALTIRE. And we also have the royal, it's called the Lion Rampant. It's a yellow flag with a red lion and a border. That's our royal flag, which was the coat of arms of Robert the Bruce, and beyond, actually. So even our flag, I mean, actually, to be honest, America sounds like it's starting to venture to that direction with your American flag, where people make assumptions based on the flying of your national flag, which to me is, again, a scary path. And again, actually, to quote him again, his ears will be ringing, but Charles Coulomb said a really interesting thing in one of his podcasts once, that war is often seen as and I'm generalizing here, but war is often seen as a sensible solution by those who've never experienced it, or something along those lines. So I think we're so far away from the strife and the struggles of our grandparents and beyond. We are going to sail into all the stuff that they work so hard to save us from and prevent. And things like, so that's why, you said you're studying history. That's why learning history as much as you can, both sides, even the stuff you don't like and don't agree with, is so important. Otherwise, we're just going to go around in circles.
I think in America, at least, we don't have sort of that attachment to there's nothing you would say by sporting, an Illinois flag, a state flag, except for if you're Texas. Texas is the only place that if you actually, have your Texas flag, that might mean something, but everywhere else, you're not going to find much meaning from using, the state flag of your state. So, and most
I'm glad to hear that.
Most people also don't use the state flags that much. People don't have a lot of attachment to to their state, usually regarding flags.
Well, I mean, the Confederate flag is obviously that's a way to stop a conversation. But the Texas flag, when I was in Texas, in Austin, I went to the state building, and I think they even somewhere on the wall I saw Republic of Texas. I was like, what the hell? And I Googled it, and for a little while it was a republic. I thought, wow, gosh, there's just so much out there to learn.
Technically, it's still the Republic of Texas.
I'm quite certain they would say that too. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't. They oddly enough, when they seceded in the American Civil War, they were the only state with probably the legal ability to do it, because one of the things that they had in their agreement when they came into the United States was the ability to secede.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So they have the right. They talk about secession. I mean, it's never that serious. or it's never taken that serious by, the Texas
But it's on-
government, I don't
But
think.
it's on the table.
But technically it could be on the table. I mean, everyone would like California to secede, but that's a
Well,
whole
yeah,
different problem.
everyone else wants California. Yeah, I think Texas even had an embassy building in London for a little while as well. I mean, it's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think, if you think of how many is 200 plus countries or however many now, and how many the number goes up and down depending on the state of play. But I think the US is a really interesting political project that's quite a long way in, but you're still having conversations about amendment this or amendment that. Well, the first two seem to make all the headlines. So I think that's really interesting. Whereas over in this country, we don't have a constitution, and it raises all sorts of gentlemen's agreements that have Magna Carta, which is very old, and we've got the Declaration of Arbroath in Scotland. We're still citing that 700, 800 years later, and that's the closest thing we've probably got. But I think the fact we don't have a constitution is not by accident. I think that was probably because then you might close yourself in, which actually makes the arguments easier in a sense, because then you know what the boundaries are. But then you can't get out of it if you want to. And I think as a constitutional geek, legal geek, watching the US at the moment is just amazing. But I hope it's a peaceful solution, whatever it is.
Sure. I mean, there's a debate. I mean, I would say that there's a debate on whether or not the Constitution in itself exists anymore. I mean, I would say it's probably about the same as you guys not having one, because there's not a lot of there's not a lot of follow through. Let's say that.
Well, I mean, things like the firearm issue, which is almost as contentious as you can get. We had a school shooting in Scotland in the 90s in Dunblane, and that was it. After that, handguns were banned, gone. That was it, in a flash. Obviously, in America, every few weeks or months now, that debate comes up again, which is fine, which is healthy. But I think some of the rhetoric about taking firearms away, and again, I don't have a stick in that fight. But that's how you inflame folk. And the US was set up to be the antidote to all the stuff over here. So it's it all just goes around in circles. But I mean, federalism is something that's talked about over here a lot. So the US model, the US was set up to not be here, and now here is talking about mirroring some of what the US is, and in the UK that's been floated a few times is how it is, and it kind of is in some sense as a federal setup, and more devolution. But then it just goes around in circles. But that's what the UK is struggling with, is its identity, really, and the fact that we have so many different cultures. I mean, Scotland itself has 3 languages. I mean, the fact that English is my first language. I'm from Inverness, so Gaelic. The Battle of Culloden was 1745. In 1746, they made Gaelic illegal. The wearing of kilts illegal. They took away the chief's legal power. It's called the Act of Prescription. So the fact that my accent doesn't sound like Billy Connolly or whoever is partly because people from my part of the country had to learn English in a hurry from Gaelic, which sounds very, very different. So when you go to Wales, oh my gosh, you hear different accents all the time. So it's kind of like America, I guess. Yeah, you drive a state over and the accents start to change. In Scotland, which is small in comparison, it's all different, and all these things can be traced back to constitutional, massive cultural decisions. Which can, I mean, the Highlands is still empty. The Highlands is geographically larger than the country of Belgium, but it has 310,000 people. That's it. So it's still empty. It's still empty from the Highland clearances, which, as I said, was the first half of the 1800s. These things don't go away. So I think some of the decisions that we made now in the US, I mean, everything seems to turn around a lot quicker in the US, will be felt for a long, long, long time. But in my country here, the Highlands is still empty. The Western Isles is still empty, because of a lot of these. You drive through the Highlands and you'll see old croft buildings that were, they got burnt out because the nobility were making room for sheep because they were going to make more money. And that ran on, as I said, 25 years after the abolition of slavery in the British Empire. But as a budding historian, as you know, the further you research, the less sense it all probably makes.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't know if that's true. I feel like it's like sense, but it's much harder to explain.
Yes, no, that's probably more accurate. Yeah, there's more to talk about. So it's either if we're not going to have 2 hours to talk about this, there's no point in us starting because it's going to take us that long to get to the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, and if you do ever make it over to this part of the world, then you'll just see it's just. In fact, right now up the Royal Mile, which is actually Scotland had a different measuring system before the Union, so a mile in Scotland was slightly longer than a mile is now. So the Royal Mile in Edinburgh is from the Palace of Holyrood up to the castle, and all the way up there just now are heraldic banners of the clan chiefs that were around in Robert the Bruce's time, hanging over the street. So there's such an attachment to history. But I just wish, back to our clan discussion, I just wish that here my countrymen and women knew a bit more, and then could have a more informed thought process about what comes next. And I guess that mirrors in some way to the US, where the United States history isn't nearly as long as over here, so there's really less excuse really for not knowing it. But even the American history is so tangled and complicated, and it's not just George Washington, Abe Lincoln, and that was it. There's an awful lot more to it, and even the individual states. It is absolutely fascinating. And if I hadn't used that word enough already, we could certainly know a lot more. But I mean, we don't learn anything about in school. We don't learn anything about the French the Bourbon family. We don't learn anything about the Holy Roman Empire. We don't learn anything about we certainly don't learn anything about the Pope or Catholic Church, unfortunately. It's just I guess you've only got one lifetime. How much are you going to get through?
Yeah. Well, maybe another time we'll talk about the closings. What is it called again? The Highland closures
clearances
or clearances.
Clearances.
Sorry. Clearances.
It's probably for anyone watching. It's probably likely to be one of the main reasons. If you're in America with Scottish heritage, or Australia, it's likely to be one of the reasons why your family ended up there.
Yeah. Maybe we'll hopefully get maybe a whole nother episode to go into it. Would you have any books or anything you suggest in reading regarding Scottish history and sort of I don't know. I feel like most stuff goes into I don't feel like there's enough like popularized to read, but any like places that we could look for that?
I think there are Neil Oliver, who is unfortunately is becoming a more contentious character by the day, but for political reasons rather than historic reasons. Neil Oliver is a historian in Scotland who's done some. It's not books. Well, he must have books, but he's done TV series on the history of Scotland, which I can listen to death. But what I'll do actually is after we finish this evening, I'll send you some ideas, and maybe they can find their way into the description below us, because there's a lot to choose from. One thing we didn't talk about tonight, but maybe we can talk about the next time, is how Jacobitism and how nationalism, which is a term that's used a lot in Europe, can mean a number of different things, is tied with modern political stuff. But I'll send you some lists. They can be we can stick them in the description below. But just read, watch, learn.
There's a guy, I can't remember. It's like he wrote like two books. It's like the phases of the Jacobite revolutions. I think it's I'll put it in the description.
There's a chap called Murray Pittock, who's associated with Glasgow University. He's an amazing writer and presenter on Jacobite history and just Scottish culture in general. But I mean, royalstuartsociety.com, there'll be publications listed there to enjoy and discover, and just keep reading and keep looking out, because there's new stuff all the time. There's always new publications all the time. But royalstuartsociety.com for Stuart history always has a publication list, and in fact you can request. There's a list of papers and journals. You can just write in and request one of them, and for a couple of pounds or dollars, you can get them sent to you.
Yeah. Well, also just I'm curious, what would what's the term for like the accent that you have compared to like, the some of the Scottish accents?
That's a great question. So I'm from Inverness, so I'm an Invernessian. So they would probably, because it's funny, if you're sat in a meeting room or a car or a train or a bus and you hear other Scottish people, you can almost work out where they're from. And as I said, Scotland is a very, very small place. So I would if someone heard me on a train and they knew Scottish accents, they would just say I have a Highland accent, but they could probably pin down to like a 60-mile radius where I was from. And then when you get to the Western Isles, yeah, because we say between every word. So if apologies, because I've probably done that throughout this entire interview. And then in the Western Isles, where Gaelic is in some parts the first language, so English is their second language. And when you drive there, on the road signs, it's all the other way around. Because in the Highlands, all across the Highlands, you have the Gaelic place names and the English place names, but in the Western Isles, you have the Gaelic place names and the English place names below. You can definitely tell where they're from. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. And even parts of Edinburgh, I mean, it's the same as New York, I guess. You can tell maybe a Manhattan accent from a Long Island accent or whatever. But Invernessian is what I would say. Although everyone thinks I'm Irish because we don't roll our R's in quite the same way as the typical groundskeeper Willie Scottish accent that there is. But there's a million Scottish accents here. It's really interesting to try and again see. And I'm now noticing I'm doing it. So Invernessian is what I am and what I sound like. But and then when you get a few whiskies in you, it all just goes downhill and falls apart. But,
there's an interesting thing, like whenever dwarves are shown in like fantasy worlds or whatever, they always have Scottish accents pretty much.
Yeah, I never quite worked that one out. But yeah, and usually the drunk in the TV show is always, there's all these stereotypes that we just live with. But yeah,
Scotland could be Irish.
Could be Irish. Yeah, well, this is funny. I mean, I don't really know many Irish people, and I think we're very similar. I mean, like in St. Patrick's Day, the whole world becomes more Irish, but we just become more Scottish. Really, I've never seen a Scotsman dress up as an Irishman for St. Patrick's Day, but we're very culturally and genetically, we're very, very close. The Irish and ourselves.
Celtic thing.
It is a Celtic thing, and well done for saying it right, because most people say Celtic, and Celtic is the Glasgow football team. But yeah, Celtic is Irish, Welsh, Brittany, and France, Isle of Man, Manx. But even in Scotland, the north is called Caledonia. Its old name. The Romans never got to us, but the Vikings really were successful here. So genetically, we don't have that Roman influence up here, which means our roads are crazy to try and drive around. So it's really, really good fun. But yes, so yeah, Scotland, I'm sort of, in the Highlands, we're always brought up to try and be advocates for Scotland and mini tour guides. But Scotland is thankfully opening up again. You're very, very welcome, anyone who's watching this, to come visit. For those who are living here, who are watching this, I hope you'd agree with me. I mean, we've got some interesting characters here, but they don't tend to travel. They tend to stay here, so at least we know where they are. But yes, it's an interesting country, and the UK politically and culturally is a hot pot right now for change. So we'll see. But everywhere is, I suppose.
Yeah, the Romans didn't get you, so they built a wall like Trump would dream of.
Well, or like Game of Thrones. I mean, it's funny that the area next to Inverness is called Westeros.
Really?
But it's two words. Yeah, Wester. The area is called Rossshire, and Westeros is right in the Wester. But yes, so the Romans built the Hadrian's Wall, but that was actually built in England. The Antonine Wall is the less famous cousin, and it's further north. So that's how far they got. So the wildlings over the wall. I don't think it's a coincidence. The Game of Thrones thing. But yeah, Westeros was an area above the wall. But yes, but yeah, I mean, and they talk about rebuilding. A lot of the English people or some English people who don't like Scotland keep talking about rebuilding Hadrian's Wall, but they don't realize Hadrian's Wall is in England. So we get if they want to come, that's fine.
You got cut off a bit. What was that last part?
We'll get some of Northumberland, and they're nice people, so they'd be very welcome.
Yeah. But yeah, so actually, that's the whole thing about one of my problems with George R.R. Martin. One of my many problems with his writing is that it's basically just putting history into just horrible places.
And then when yeah, and like I kind of wish that the TV series came a lot later, because then he ended up getting rushed, and it all just ended up a disaster.
True.
I mean, it's funny actually. I know this show usually talks about TV shows, but I mean, Game of Thrones, when you look at it, was the biggest show in the world for years, and then the
Yeah.
last 2 seasons or 2.5 seasons, no one talks about it now. It's so bizarre. I mean, Lost had a longer shelf life. Breaking Bad is still talked about more than Game of Thrones.
Mhm.
There's these, and the Harry Potter films, which I know you've watched and reviewed. It's amazing how Game of Thrones, which just ruled our lives, people who were into that for so long, because of 2 seasons, which I don't think were very good, personally, it's just gone. It just absolutely ruined, in my view, so much legacy and fun, because that show was, as long as you didn't take the books, that book TV show connection is always going to be disappointing, I suppose, for
Yeah.
many.
Mhm.
But it went from being the biggest show in the world to just gone. That's it, gone. And
Did you
Star
ever
Wars
see-
is almost on this, headed for the same path if they're not careful.
True. Did you ever see there was a rap battle? There's a like YouTube rap battle between like George R. R. Martin and J.R. Tolkien. Like it was like
No.
there's like a there's this group on YouTube that does rap battles between like famous historical figures or whatever. And it's just about who has the better series or whatever. And once Game of Thrones ended, and once that final season came out, literally all the comments are just, Tolkien was better, Tolkien was better, Tolkien was better. It's just
I mean,
like
I mean, that sounds like a very sophisticated rap battle, but yeah.
It is. It's actually like you should check it out. It's
Definitely
one of the most entertaining, but also very thoughtful, like
well, one of the interesting things there is that the Lord of the Rings series, coming next year, so that there's more there still to come.
That's
and from
sketchy.
Well, possibly, but from a legal geek point of view, the J.R.R. Tolkien's family really got shafted, as we say here, with the Lord of the Rings movie. So that the estate didn't get the money it deserved.
Sure.
But yeah, Game of Thrones, I'm sure in our lifetime someone will remake it and have another go. But as I said, I think if they remake the last 2.5 seasons, I think I could live with that. But yeah, I just think that's interesting that Game of Thrones just literally overnight disappeared. And as I said, if Star Wars isn't careful, I think they might run the same risk. I mean, I think George Lucas is sat just smiling wherever he is, because they're really, other than the Mandalorian, which I did enjoy. I think some and Rogue One I enjoyed, but I think some of the canon films I've really missed the mark, I think, in my view. But feel free to disagree.
No, you're plenty right about the especially the sequel trilogy. To me, just garbage. But
yeah, garbage, absolutely.
But
that's a much better way to sum it up.
But George R. Martin first has to actually finish the series. Then maybe someone can do a full like remaster. It's amazing how it's a TV series, but it still feels like, because I have some knowledge of the books and stuff. But it still feels somehow like it has the content level of a movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Like,
yeah,
because there's just so much.
Well, like I actually said the other day I was going to start rewatching it, because I literally, there's so much going on, you've got no idea. Like, you don't get the same fatigue, because there's lots of bits that you probably noticed the second time. But I was a big fan of that show when it was on. I sort of watched it descend into garbage, like everyone else did, because a lot of it, this first season had a lot of my school chums in them, because in the Highlands there's lots of battle reenactment groups, and I had very long hair at the time as well, and a lot of them were part of these battle reenactment groups that were in, they were in Robin Hood. They each of them died about 6 times in Outlander. They were in Lord of the Rings and the Eagle. Some of these type shows. So yeah, they're in everything.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I'm sure you could do with the work, but yeah. So here's hoping. But yeah, fantasy like that, and Tolkien is a great example, because I had no idea how rooted that was in Catholic mindsets and Catholic sensibilities. None at all, obviously.
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow, it actually makes it even more impressive that there was a there was more of a plan than an author might normally have when he or she is sort of looking to build an epic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to the Plotlines episode about the remake of or the Lord of the Rings series. Yeah, we'll see what happens with that.
The real question will be who. I think the best way for me to take on Lord of the Rings will be to have someone on. So I'll have to really find someone that will be really good to get on to discuss it. But yeah, so I'll, if whatever Lord of the Rings turns out to be, I mean, the new show, I'm I'm very caught. I don't even know if I'm optimistic anymore. There's just so much, like there's so much possibility of poor. I mean, it's actually not Lord of the Rings. That's the irony. They're not remaking the movies. They're just they're starting from a place that doesn't have as much info, even though it has a lot of info in it. And they could take it many directions as long as my understanding is they have to follow what the books say, though. They can't contradict what the books say. So the only thing is, what are they going to do in the in-between time? They could totally just. Also, I don't want it to be a Game of Thrones. I just don't. I don't want like the sex and the part of it. Like, it should be, to me, it should represent the artist that created it. And George R. R. Martin, it's fine that he sort of that does event in some sense represent how he views the world, but that wasn't how Tolkien viewed the world.
Yeah, true. And I think I've heard that expressed before, because there is a formula that seems everything kind of falling into, that you need this much. In fact, no, you need more sex than the last big, successful show. They can only go so far with violence. For some reason, people treat violence as, the red line that you shouldn't cross. But yes, and that's it is weird. And I think the some of the Star Wars films fell into that. It's too much of it led before, but it feels like a follower now. And I feel like that was some of the Star Trek stuff. It was pioneering in the day, and now it feels like a follower of fashion, which is not what it's. You've got all these tools to create. You really have to try hard to not create a masterpiece, and yet that seems to happen over and over and over again. Which is so disappointing. But yeah, so we'll see. We'll see what happens. I know you've had a few guests on this show that I think could speak to the Lord of the Rings situation quite acutely. So there'll be lots to dissect and pick apart, I suspect.
Yeah, and I'm actually in the process. I'm have the desire to be a little bit of a writer. So I have some work that I'm working on. Who knows when it will, where it will lead me. But so a novel might be something that I could potentially get myself into in the future.
Well, make sure you do it, because everyone talks about writing a novel, and obviously, seeing it through. I had plans to write a book on an ancestor of mine for next year, and but I had that plan a long time ago. So and next year is not far away. So yeah, so just if you're going to do it, just make sure you do, because it's better to say you wish you had not done something than you wish you had.
Sure. Yeah. Well, it's been really amazing talking to you, and I think we've had a absolutely fantastic conversation. There's so much to talk about with Scotland and just the UK in general, and tradition. I mean, the whole point is that tradition is so diverse in of itself that there's so much to get into.
There is, but we also must be mindful that tradition is created out of new ideas. That's why we have tradition. So it's not putting down every new idea or practice, but measuring them about what good they do. And if the new idea is being created just because it's not the old idea, I don't think that's the path to progress. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being on.
Oh, no, Connor, thank you very much for the invite. I mean, you talked a long time. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I certainly hope it was of some interest to everyone here watching, and the very best of luck. Make sure to subscribe, everyone, to Connor's channel if you haven't already.
Thank you.
Lord Connor, sorry. And
no, not. I don't want to be associated with buying up lordships.
Well, it's Christmas soon. You never know. But yes, so but thank you for your time, Connor, and we'll do this again sometime.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for watching and listening, and have a great day. Bye.